Brett is going to talk about discrete event simulation. People use the term simulation often, but I call discrete event simulation, and I call what-if analysis the optimization when we run what-if. So we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I get this message from Brett. You remember the message?
Yeah.
Tell them the story.
I cold called Laura because I had been following her, and I said, I recently joined an organization, and despite even the pandemic, we've got some internal issues and challenges. I'd like to get kind of your perspective, and can you help me out? And Laura returned my call.
That's right. And we had a great conversation about visualization of variability and about its current use of optimization. This client, or this company, not a client, was actually a Gaines Systems customer that I had met at a Gaines event, and I talked through the difference between optimization and simulation. And Brett's problem, who's the chief supply officer, is we're in the middle of a pandemic and he can't get enough gloves. He's going to talk to you about the importance of gloves. And, gloves were really important during the pandemic. So, Brett, I'm going to leave you on the stage. This will bring you forward, and your slides are loaded. So We'll see you in about 25 minutes.
Great, thank you. So I realize that I'm in the middle of, where food coma is starting to set in from lunch. And so we're hopefully going to, keep this entertaining, and I'm probably in between you and a break. So I also wanted to kind of review what I learned personally today is that from Kevin, I'm going to go out and buy a Toro lawnmower for sure now. Rick and Clorox, I'm going to go, have my favorite barbecue at Kingsford and Hidden Valley Ranch. And Ashley, I need a good night's sleep because I slept here last night at a Western and didn't sleep all that well. So some really fantastic stories that we heard this morning on all of those, the good work that folks are doing in supply chains, across our professional industry. Western Digital, massive supply chain and work being done there. So I'm really happy to be here today to share a little bit of our story at Amicare Royal, what we're doing and what we called Operate Project Rubik. So really showcasing, as Laura had teed up, a network design that leveraged both optimization and simulation to really develop our comprehensive supply chain strategy. We'll talk about the timing of that. It started actually, I joined Amicare Royal in May of 2020. The effort really kind of started to take hold in terms of strategy work in the beginning of 2021, and we're into implementation now. But I'll walk you through a history and give you an overview. We may not be as commonly known as the likes of Clorox and Toro, but chances are you've used some of our product. We'll talk about the case for the engagement, the reason why and why now, the strategy development work that took place, the implementation piece of how to actually bring that strategy to life and actually make it a reality, as well as the value proposition and some of the results that we're seeing today. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. So who is Amicare Royal? As I said, probably not known, but you've probably touched some of our products. We're a food service and packaging organization. We have over about 6,000 products across 25 different divisions or so. We're in the restaurant space, so quick service restaurants, QSRs, fast casual, full service dining. We're in not only restaurants, but institutional, Jan Sand space, education, schools, hospitals, healthcare. As the slide indicates, we're in the front of the house and customer facing as well as back of the house. Our top divisions, gloves, number one division, so really important during the pandemic, as you can imagine, and what we went through early days of the pandemic. Takeout packaging, so you think about restaurants that shut down and moved from on-premise to takeout, plastic products, moving from environmentally conscious to get it to a wrapped meal kit. I don't care. It can't be bulk. to our eco-friendly line of packaging and containers in molded fiber. Amicare Royal is made up of a couple of different business units. We're essentially, Amicare is under an importing label. We have domestic manufacturing in our McNairn and Ross and Wallace business units that do food service, paper conversions, and paper products. And then we have a direct container business that provides basically logistic services from our supply base over to our customers, and we don't actually take inventory of the product, but we coordinate logistic services at a full container load perspective. How we go to market under the, if you set aside the domestic manufacturing piece, because that was out of scope, but on the importer side, how we go to market, basically through a couple of different channels. The main channels are distribution, so our customers are broadliners like the Cisco's and US Foods of the world, regional distributors like Edward Don or Southeastern Paper. We have national accounts, end users or concepts that we're in, the likes of Chipotle, Firehouse, Five Guys. This is the scope in the red box that actually the engagement kind of centered around. It represents about 50% of the total business across the portfolio. We also have our direct containers that I mentioned, do a lot in terms of cash and carry there. And then 511 is our essentially our Canadian entity that mirrors the distribution and national accounts business up in Canada as well. Amicare Royal, the journey really started to take shape in 2014 when private equity got involved. And we're a series of kind of founder-led, very agile companies, simple product portfolio, simple supply chain networks, 1 or 2 locations. Private equity got involved, and over the last 8 years, eight acquisitions. So a lot of growing pains, a lot of complexity, not only from, you think about an IT perspective with all of the ERP and planning systems, but also from a supply chain perspective. 6,000 SKUs across those 25 divisions, about 2,000 ship-to locations, about 1,000 customers, a supply base of about 250 factories, both domestic and international, in tremendous growth. So you can imagine when we hit 2021, even before the pandemic and global, unprecedented global supply chain disruption, at Amicare Royal, we really had a lot of growing pains as we were trying to bring these networks together, grow up into our growth aspirations and ambitions for the future. So perfect time. Some people would say, no time is a good time, even in the middle of the pandemic, but really perfect time to step back and say, how do we start to bring and integrate and bring synergies to the supply chain network? So the case for Project Rubik, you can tell every supply chain person wants to be a marketer, right? So Project Rubik was born, and it was really to step back and say, how do we deliver? You heard a lot today about the customer being at the center. How do we deliver our customer experience? We knew that we weren't meeting that, even before the pandemic, but in terms of, not only surviving the day of COVID and kind of our immediate, but really stepping back and saying, how do we, at the end of the day, come out of the pandemic in a much better spot as a supply chain in doing that longer term work? Let's do that even though we're in the middle of the pandemic. We need to do that today. So we found ourselves, as you can imagine, with a lot of growing pains plus the external pieces of the supply chain with, candidly lower service levels that our customers were grappling with, increased order splits, back orders, impacting efficiencies in the DC, a high cost to serve, network transfers, and non-value-added activity in the network, inefficient use of inventory imbalances across the network, simply wrong product at the wrong place, lack of standardization. So you can imagine these 8 organizations kind of coming together, each having their own operating policies, purchasing and buying policies, replenishment guidelines, When I asked, what's a standard order lead time, we would get the response, well, it depends on the customer, the product, the time of year. We try to fulfill everybody as soon as possible. So you had severe kind of lack of standardization. We were at a point where, looking inward, we said we have an opportunity really to develop our people and capabilities. We stood up a demand planning group in between the sales force and supply. We introduced IBP, or Integrated Business Planning, Sales and Operations Planning, whatever you want to call it, but that process between supply and demand and finance. And at the same time, we also looked to increase our systems, enhance systems that weren't working for us in our current state and clearly weren't going to work for us in the future. So we upgraded our planning tools, our WMS and TMS systems. And then finally, really, it was more about our baseline understanding, getting a true understanding of our cost drivers and knowledge about our overall supply chain network, where we were winning and losing, and the service implications. So as we embarked on this at the beginning of 2021, important to step back and say, we had started with, on the left-hand side of the page, of a very kind of siloed view of, hey, we're going to optimize our service, we're going to optimize, we're going to look at customer service, we're going to look at demand and our product portfolio, and then inbound and outbound, and very kind of siloed. And quickly we kind of realized that we needed to really look at the customer service strategy, the commercial strategy, get input from our customers and competitors, where we're winning and losing, what our true business objectives are. And the supply chain needs to follow, the supply chain strategy needs to follow the commercial strategy. And this notion of kind of those two things iterating back and forth. So it was really important that we structured this not as a supply chain initiative, but really a kind of a business initiative. Myself and the commercial lead were the two stakeholders, and we set this up in this way of 1A. 1B was also the need, in every organization you have to kind of pay to play, and there's always a desire, particularly with strategy work, it often takes much longer than maybe the organization realizes or stakeholders realize. So we wanted to put a fast track in terms of the ability to kind of accelerate quick wins or learnings that we could apply to key accounts. So we did this track of quick wins for focused customers. Most initiatives start with a comprehensive baseline. That was the case as well. We did customer interviews and surveys about what's meaningful for our customers to get a true understanding around fill rates, case fill rates, are splits acceptable or not. There was kind of this perception whether or not it was a problem for our customers. We tried to validate that. We looked at our customer demand and our ship-to locations. We did an affinity analysis to see if there were like products being ordered or not. We looked at the variability in velocity segmentation. We looked kind of end-to-end in terms of network cost from an inbound perspective, receiving and handling, storage, outbound, what's happening in our customer delivery in terms of out-of-region shipments, not at the appropriate DC, whether it was picked up or delivered, the mode mix. We were candidly historically had about 2/3 LTL, 1/3 truckload, shipment size profiles, order mins, inventory, the impact of inventory on our, and capacity on our sites, vendor import metrics, domestic, as well as kind of moves within the network. So comprehensive baseline to really understand our jumping off point. Optimization and simulation, I'll tell you that critical for buy-in in the organization, and I will say that don't really have time to go into too much detail, but the nuances of kind of standard optimization and what you get in terms of output of different scenarios or strategies, and then the use of simulation to really model those and take actual orders and really test the performance of those alternatives. So that's something that typically we would not have done and not have gone that far. And there were some real aha moments that probably led us to some things that we didn't really realize. And I'll go into that for a second. There's also kind of a shout out that we were able to partner. At the time, we were using Gaines. OptiLogic was our partner on the initiative, and we coupled Gaines and OptiLogic together as our planning tools. So we were able to leverage the buying logic and inventory policies of Gaines during that simulation work. So really, really powerful as an organization to have two vendor partners working with us at the same time. So let me talk a little bit about kind of some of the work that was done in terms of actual planning and execution logic. We went through, the buying logic of, we need the product. Is it available in the network? Do you go source it? Do you have to buy up to a container build? Go through the receiving operations logic in terms of inbound shipments and respecting storage capabilities, and whether or not we need offsite 3PLs, customer order routing. Is a partial fulfillment allowed? Are lines, can they be split? Can orders be back ordered or not? And then transportation mode selection, and whether it's as inventory becomes available, or less than truckload or partial shipments go down, full truckloads and go up, and service goes up. So those simulations pieces really kind of were tested across essentially 5 different strategies. One was kind of a planned, optimized network, a hub and spoke, a centralized, and a reduced footprint network. And I just would point out that we really thought going in that a lot of SKUs, long tail, we're going to go ahead and we're going to probably consolidate and do some type of centralized or hub and spoke model for particularly that long tail and C items. Through the use of simulation, we actually discovered that as you consolidated Cs, the buying bracket up on the A and B items where you left it not in a hub model, actually that outweighed all of the synergies in the consolidation benefit of a hub and spoke or a centralized model. Something that we probably would have never really realized in a pure optimization scenario. So, bottom line, we reassigned 27% of our customers in ship to locations. We actually talked about, this was not an effort of brick and mortar change of location, but really about policies and inventory and buying policies and stocking strategies. We reassigned these customers, and we essentially got results across the board that you typically, you look at and say, I'm not sure that this is true. Financial results, cost per case goes down. Working capital did go up from a financial perspective, but it almost went in lockstep as we looked at forecasted demand. It almost went up in lockstep in terms of the demand that was served. Fill rates from a service perspective, fill rates went up, splits, back orders, and lost sales all went down. Our storage utilization actually had a DC that was in our planned network that was over capacity at 176%. You might say, well, how does that happen? It's trailers on the yard, 3PLs, regional work. The DC got that and reconfigured into about 90% and utilized the network more appropriately in the existing footprint that we actually had. And then customer delivery, another kind of aha that came out of this. You recall that I said we were running at 2/3 LTL shipments, 1/3 truckload. We actually know that we can flip that to 2/3 full truckload, 1/3 less than truckload. So an important piece on customer delivery. So how do we, make that happen? At the end of the day, all of those things are great on paper. Comes to the end of the almost a year into it and say, now you got to bring that to life, right? how do you implement that? And I think that's an important piece that making it a reality. We went through some pilot work, test and learn. We then, it's almost like, running down the highway at 90 miles an hour and changing the tires a bit, right? Because we're going to make all of these network moves, but we don't want our customers to feel any of that pain, if you will. So we essentially reconfigured and repointed inbounds that were on the ocean to our new DCs, flipped the network in terms of default locations, and then started an aggressive kind of ramp down of inventory, ramp up in new locations, and then an aggressive kind of governance and tracking process as well. Definitely change management involved, not only externally with our customers to make sure that they weren't impacted by this, as well as internally of what we were doing in the network. So the value proposition, what excites me is that not only did we have the ability to kind of take on a large-scale initiative, by the way, we had a false start in 2018, so our board was a little skeptical of this to begin with, but really kind of to deliver what we think were savings. And then the exciting piece is that we're putting it in place, and actually we're starting to see results. So as you can imagine, coming into 2022, still in the middle of the pandemic, we actually projected an annual savings of almost 20% across the network. That's a huge number. And I said, I'm not going to go to that's in a stable, steady state. So as a supply chain professional, I said, we got to really kind of, de-risk this. And given the volatility and uncertainty of the marketplace at the time with COVID, we really discounted that savings to probably around 6 or 7% that we thought we could get to. So for example, our model said, hey, there won't be any transfers in the network. We knew that average day delays was still up into the 30 to 45 days. We had incremental inventory in the network. So we tempered that and discounted the savings. We took kind of half year to say 6 to 9 months of implementation. And we said we should be able to get 3 to 5% savings. I'm really pleased to say that, and this slide is a little dated, we're probably at the 26-week mark, but all of these trends are still holding true and actually improving. So orders by default location is up, improving, double digit, 14%, lines 13, in cases, this is almost up to 10. Our outbound transportation is headed in the right direction, so we're seeing synergies there. We're getting better mode mix optimization as well. So we're seeing a lot of those. It's early yet, but even as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're really seeing those results come true. So last but not least, I'd leave you with, our key takeaways for this project. Increased knowledge of the overall supply chain, in a true in-depth understanding of where we're winning and losing, the cost drivers, service implications. Our operating policies, our purchasing policies, splits, replenishment guidelines, order mins, hugely impactful for us. Again, we didn't change the physical network, the brick and mortar, but clarified those things and really what the impact is on the network. The multiple strategic scenarios to not only meet our immediate needs, but also prep us for long-term work. And to deliver, pragmatic, achievable savings to the organization. So our implementation work continues. We're really excited about the effort, and we're really excited about our future.
Great presentation. Just stay up on the stage a couple more minutes. I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we're going to go to break, and then Allison's going to give a case study at Medtronic on what if, optimization, and digital twin. All of these terms kind of float around in the industry, and most people don't understand what they mean. So you remember our conversation when I talked about what if optimization versus digital simulation? How would you explain the difference of the power to be able to do discrete event simulation versus what-if optimization?
Yeah, so I think it really gave us the confidence that what we were proposing was executable. And I don't think we would have really had that in-depth view of how the network was going to perform. So taking that back, and we were very confident that what we had proposed was very executable and doable with simulation.
So I don't know if you remember our call, it's been a long time ago, but I remember you asking me the question of how do I get executive buy-in?
Yeah, which is always a challenge.
And what's your takeaway from this case study and your journey?
Yeah, so we were fortunate to have a board and senior leadership buy-in to begin. I'll tell you from a commercial side, it was very important for me personally to make sure that I had a commercial partner in that, and it took a while, candidly.
How long did it take
It was the first 3 or 4 months was really kind of billed as, well, that's a supply chain issue, that's a network. Like, we'll come and we'll provide input, but to be a meaningful partner. And it wasn't until we started really showing them the work that we wanted to do about customer interviews and surveys and the power of what this could really do that we kind of had to. So we won over some of the commercial counterparts for sure.
So what's your advice for the group out of this experience?
It takes probably a little longer than you think. It's worth it. I think you got to do some of that hard work on the executive buy-in and stakeholder stuff. I think spend more time on the planning and I think it translates to the implementation goes smoother at the end of the day.
I would just say one of the things I'd like you to take away is you had the courage to ask the question.
Yeah.
You didn't know from that LinkedIn message if I was going to answer the question or where it was going to head, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people would say, well, why did you take on this in the middle of COVID?
The pandemic, right?
And we thought many times maybe we should punt and maybe we should wait until we get out of the woods in the pandemic. And the reality is there's really no perfect time to start this work. And it probably, candidly, is probably a bigger project than I initially had thought as well. Happy that, it led to this, but you can always wait till and there's no perfect time. So we decided, hey, let's go with it because candidly, some of the pandemic, well, it was challenging. It probably provided a little bit of air cover for us as well in terms of some of the internal things that we had challenges with even before the pandemic. So there's no time like the present to really start planning for the future. And I would agree, all the conversations we've had today, that very difficult to get airtime and stakeholder availability to talk about the future when most people are kind of dealing with what's in front of them today.
Right.
The reality is you can't afford not to. Right?
Exactly. Which was one of the takeaways from one of the Supply Chains to Admire award winners is you can't afford not to. He was like, I think we've been too inward looking, right? We've been too busy to really put our head up. And it's my hope that this conference is all about putting your head up and, asking those courageous questions.